My name is Liam O'Connell. I'm 32, a soldier making a life for myself here in Austin, Texas. When people ask where I'm from, the answer is always Scranton, Pennsylvania. It's one of those little towns where every family's history is common knowledge, where secrets are buried under the same soil as the ancient tree roots and whispered about behind tightly shut doors. But ask me what home is and I'll have to pause. For me, home isn't the place I came from. It's the place I'm fighting to create right now. A safe harbor for my heart, a shelter from the ghosts that still chase me. Right now, from my chair in this modest Austin apartment, I'm just watching my 9-year-old Maya. She's completely lost in her coloring book at our small kitchen table. The lamplight catches the deep brown of her hair, and when she smiles, something that doesn't happen nearly often enough, it feels like the only solid ground I have left to stand on. She's why I'm telling you this. To explain any of it, though, I have to rewind. I need to take you back to when the world I knew began to splinter. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was more like a hairline fracture in a window pane. A tiny line that just kept spreading silently until the whole thing was too fragile to hold together anymore. Scranton was never a launch pad for grand ambitions. It was a factory town, defined by the steel mill smokestacks that painted the sky a permanent shade of gray and governed by a set of silent, unbreakable rules. The code was simple. You put in your hours, you guarded your family's name like it was gold, and you gave the neighbors absolutely nothing to gossip about over their fences. The O'Connells, my family, were woven right into that social fabric. We were a standard-issue Irish Catholic middle-class household, and our values were as rigid and deeply ingrained as the patterns in old oak. Our home was a 2-story gray house, the lawn always perfectly manicured, a crucifix mounted squarely over the front door. It was the very picture of respectability. But the moment you stepped inside, a different kind of chill set in. It wasn't about the thermostat. It was the unnerving silence that filled the spaces between us. My father, my mother, my little sister Siobhan, and me. I felt like I was watching my own family from behind a one-way mirror, a foreign object in a photograph where everyone else belonged. I was the odd corner that ruined the symmetry. My father, Patrick O'Connell, was a man built like the machinery he oversaw, tall and solid with piercing eyes that seemed to measure everything for flaws. He was a technical supervisor at the steel mill, a role where precision was everything, and he carried that exacting nature through our front door like a briefcase. For him, life was a set of schematics to be followed without deviation. Affection was a variable he couldn't control, so he simply omitted it. There were no hugs, no declarations of love or pride. His version of fatherhood was a series of lectures on duty, honor, and the immense weight of the O'Connell name. My choice to enlist was a profound disappointment to him. He saw the military as a fallback for boys without the intellect for engineering or medicine. His vision for me involved a university, a corner office, and framed diplomas that would add to the family's prestige. I couldn't breathe in that future he'd designed. I felt a desperate need to escape, to see something beyond the cramped horizons of Scranton, to discover a mission that was mine and mine alone, far from the suffocating pressure of his plans. My mother, Fiona, moved through our quiet house with a delicate grace. Her blonde hair was always flawlessly arranged, and her eyes were a pale, distant blue, holding the same placid, unreachable quality as a winter sky. She was the consummate housewife, a pillar of the local parish who orchestrated everything from charity drives to the annual autumn bazaar. But that public sweetness was a mask. Behind closed doors, her demeanor toward me was rigid, her words delivered with a chilling precision. "Liam, remember who you are," she would tell me, her tone perfectly level yet sharp enough to draw blood. "Do not bring embarrassment upon this family." My mother lived and died by the court of public opinion. She never once inquired about the state of my heart or the shape of my ambitions. Her lessons were about posture, about knowing when to lower your eyes in prayer, and most importantly, about the strategic value of keeping your mouth shut. She was my father's unwavering ally, a united front. Even on the rare occasions I could see the flicker of dissent in her eyes. I remember one fight vividly when I was 15 and wanted more than anything to try out for the school football team. My father dismissed it as a brutish spectacle, utterly beneath an O'Connell. My eyes shot to my mother, pleading for just a shred of support, but she just stared at her own tightly laced fingers, her knuckles white. "Your father has spoken, Liam," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "There's no need to create a scene." That was the moment I understood. In our house, love wasn't a feeling. It was a transaction based on compliance. Siobhan, my sister and 3 years my junior, was the sun around which my parents orbited. She had their golden hair and an effortless smile that charmed everyone she met. She was the child they had ordered from a catalog, dutiful, lovely, and born with an innate talent for making people happy. Siobhan instinctively knew the right words to coax a rare smile from our father, the right way to move through town so that she was universally adored. In high school, she was homecoming queen and captain of the cheer squad, the girl every other girl envied and every boy wanted to date. But that bright, popular girl wasn't my sister, not really. When we were little, she was my shadow, always trailing behind me, pestering me to read her a story or build a fort in the living room. Then adolescence hit and she began to change. Her gaze shifted when she looked at me, becoming a strange cocktail of condescension and pity. That look intensified tenfold after I announced my enlistment plans. She didn't bother to soften the blow. "A common soldier, Liam? Seriously? Don't you have any self-respect?" My parents lavished her with praise, crowning her the pride of the O'Connells. Every good report card, every academic trophy earned her a celebration, with half the neighborhood invited over to toast her success. I was just the background blur in her triumphant photos, the brother who could never quite measure up. When Siobhan married a successful attorney and gave birth to a son, her status was permanently elevated to sainthood. They called her boy the O'Connell heir, a pronouncement that rendered me and any future I might build completely invisible. I wasn't a problem child, not by a long shot, but the feeling of being an outsider in my own home was a constant companion. I found my solace in solitude, losing myself in books or trekking through the open fields at the edge of town. Out there, the only voices were the wind and the rustling grass, a welcome relief from the sound of my parents' hushed, disappointed arguments. I had an aversion to rules that lacked reason, a trait that branded me as the family misfit. So when I chose the military, it was like a grenade tossed into the quiet chill of our house. It started with a recruitment poster I saw hanging in a school hallway. The soldier's face was set, his gaze locked on something distant and important. In that instant, I knew. That's who I had to become. I didn't want the sterile white coat of a doctor or the polished shoes of an engineer. I wanted to be a man whose life was measured by conviction, not by a salary. The reaction when I broke the news was exactly what I'd expected. My parents stared at me as if I had just announced my intention to burn down the family home. "The military?" my father thundered, his voice bouncing off the living room walls. "Who in God's name do you think you are, Liam? Some grunt with no future? Is your goal to make this family the laughingstock of Scranton?" My mother remained silent, but her expression was one of profound betrayal, as if I had physically wounded her. Siobhan, who was only 14 at the time, let out a little snicker from her spot on the sofa. "You've always been good at making everyone miserable, Liam." I didn't fight back. I just stood there, absorbing their fury. but beneath it a strange calm was settling in my gut. For the very first time, I felt the undeniable certainty that I was on the right path. This decision wasn't for them, it was for me. It was the first real act of defiance in my life, a quiet rebellion that was setting the stage for the earthquake to come. The morning I shipped out for basic training, the sky over Scranton was a thick, oppressive gray, a perfect mirror of the weight on my shoulders. I had a worn-out duffel bag slung over one shoulder, stuffed with a few changes of clothes. Tucked safely inside my jacket was the Army's acceptance letter. My father didn't even get up to say goodbye. He just sat in his armchair, hidden behind the morning paper, pretending I didn't exist. My mother met me at the door, her hands wrung so tight her knuckles were pale. "Liam," she said, her voice betraying no emotion, "it's not too late to reconsider. Don't make a mistake you can't undo." I didn't answer her. I simply gave a short nod, turned, and walked away from that gray house. I felt rather than heard the front door click shut behind me. From an upstairs window, I caught a glimpse of Siobhan, her face a mask of detached curiosity, like a scientist observing a specimen escaping its enclosure. I never once looked back. As the bus pulled away from the station and Scranton's smokestacks shrank in the distance, a profound lightness filled my chest. It felt like I had finally unstrapped a massive, invisible weight I'd been carrying my entire life. Fort Jackson, South Carolina, was another planet. No one there gave a damn that I was an O'Connell or what my father did for a living. All that mattered was your time on the 2-mile run, how much you could press, and whether you had the grit to make it through another day of relentless training without breaking. I felt a strange sense of camaraderie I'd never known before, a kinship forged not in warmth but in mutual respect. I pushed myself harder than I ever had, and for the first time I was being measured by my actions, not by a suffocating set of inherited expectations. I met a woman named Sophia 2 years into my service, right after getting stationed at Fort Liberty in North Carolina. The air that summer evening was thick and sticky, the kind that clings to your skin. A guy from my squad had insisted I come out with him to a little dive bar just off base, promising it would help me relax. I wasn't much for crowds, so I found a quiet corner and nursed a beer, just watching the chaos. And then I saw her. Sophia was leaning against the bar, talking to the bartender. Her dark hair fell in a long, straight curtain down her back, and her brown eyes had a spark, a kind of raw life force I'd never encountered. She was just wearing a simple green sundress, but there was an energy about her that made it impossible to tear my eyes away. It might have been her laugh. It wasn't the polite, measured titter my mother used for social functions. This was an unrestrained, joyous sound, as if she was determined to wring every last drop of happiness from the moment. Approaching her wasn't even a consideration. I've never been smooth with words, and I've always assumed I was too dull to hold the interest of a woman who shone that brightly. But then her gaze drifted in my direction. Our eyes locked, and she offered a small, curious smile. Before my brain could even register what was happening, she was walking toward my table. She set her bottle down with a soft clink. "You're looking at me like I just crash-landed a UFO," she said, her voice teasing. "What's on your mind?" I was a mess, fumbling for words, trying to explain that I wasn't great at this whole talking to people thing. She just threw her head back and laughed, a sound like bells in the wind. "Okay, I'll make it easy for you. I'm Sophia." "And you are?" she asked, gesturing toward my uniform. We ended up talking for the rest of the night. Sophia told me her story. She was a nurse working at a local clinic, grew up in Charlotte, and was recently divorced. She didn't try to sugarcoat the failed marriage or present some flawless version of herself. I was completely captivated, not just by her looks or her wit, but by the way she moved through the world, free, unburdened by the opinions of others. Sophia was the embodiment of everything my family would find unacceptable. a fiercely independent woman who made no apologies for who she was. Before Sophia, my enlistment had already sent the first major shockwave through my family. I had called home after graduation from basic, a tiny, foolish part of me hoping for a word of congratulations. Instead, the conversation immediately devolved into another front in our ongoing war. "You are throwing your life away, Liam." My father's voice had crackled over the line, each word a shard of ice. "Where do you see this path leading? It's a dead end, a job with no prospects. Do you have any idea the shame you're bringing on this family?" I squeezed the receiver, my knuckles turning white, the heat rising in my face. "It's my life, Dad," I managed to say, struggling to keep my voice from shaking. "I'm not living it for the approval of Scranton." My mother predictably offered no support. "You can still enroll in university, Liam," she chimed in. "Don't let one rash decision destroy your entire future." I slammed the phone down, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was in that moment that the full truth landed. This wasn't just disapproval. To them, my life choice was a personal, unforgivable betrayal. After that, my calls home became infrequent. The letters I wrote got shorter, and the replies I received, when they bothered to reply at all, were curt demands that I reconsider my path and reminders not to tarnish the O'Connell name. When Sophia and I started getting serious, I knew introducing her to my family would be a challenge. Still, I wasn't prepared for the sheer ferocity of their rejection. We'd been together for half a year when I decided it was time. I wanted them to meet the real Sophia. Not just the divorced nurse, but the brilliant, resilient woman who had captured my heart. That trip home was a catastrophic error in judgment. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste from the second we stepped over the threshold. My mother's eyes raked over Sophia, a cold, clinical assessment, as if she were inspecting a piece of damaged goods. My father didn't bother with a handshake. He gave a curt, dismissive nod and immediately retreated to his armchair. From there, he launched a barrage of interrogation. "Where are you employed? Who are your people? What was the reason for your divorce?" Sophia handled it with a grace I couldn't have mustered, but I saw her knuckles go white as she clenched her fists in her lap. She spoke about her work, sharing stories about her patients and her long-term goal of one day opening a small community clinic, and it didn't matter. In their eyes, Sophia was defined by a single fact. She was a divorcee, an unacceptable blemish on the O'Connell family's pristine record. Later that evening, while Sophia was upstairs, my father summoned me to the back porch. The air was cool, the only light a weak yellow glow from the fixture over the door. He looked me straight in the eye. "Liam," he said, his voice flat and final, "if you go through with this, if you marry that woman, you will no longer be a part of this family. We will not have that kind of filth associated with our name." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I felt like I was standing on sand. "She is not filth," I shot back, my voice shaking with a rage I could barely contain. "She is the woman I love." He let out a short, contemptuous laugh. "Love? You're still a child, Liam. Love doesn't protect a family's reputation. Love doesn't put food on the table. She will ruin you, and one day you will look back and hate yourself for not listening to me." My mother, a silent sentinel in the doorway, added her own poison. "There are better girls out there, Liam. Girls who are worthy of you, worthy of us." We left Scranton the very next morning, Sophia's hand held tight in mine. She never said a word about their cruelty, but I saw the telltale redness in her eyes as we drove away. About 6 months after that disastrous visit, on a crisp autumn evening, I took Sophia to a quiet overlook near Fort Liberty. I didn't have a fancy ring or a rehearsed speech. As the sun set, painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and red, I just dropped to one knee. "Sophia," I said, my voice thick with emotion, You make me want to be a good man. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face as she nodded and threw her arms around my neck. In that moment, floating on a cloud of pure joy, I was the luckiest man on earth. But a cold knot was already forming in my stomach. I knew without a doubt that this happiness would come at a steep price. I mailed wedding invitations to my parents, fully aware they would end up in the trash. Some small, delusional part of me still held out hope. My mother's reply came in a single, sterile envelope. The note inside was brief. "Liam, you have made your decision. Do not expect us to bear witness to your folly." Siobhan didn't respond at all. I found out later through the grapevine that she'd been telling people around town that her brother had thrown his future away for a woman who was beneath him. Even secondhand, those words felt like a physical blow. We were married in a little chapel in Raleigh, surrounded by a handful of my army buddies and Sophia's warm, welcoming family. There were no O'Connells in the pews. As I stood at the altar watching Sophia walk toward me, a hollow ache echoed in my chest. But the second our eyes met, I knew. I had made the right choice. I didn't need their blessing. I just needed her. After the wedding, the already strained connection to my family snapped completely. The phone calls trickled to nothing. The silence became permanent. Siobhan, I learned, had married her lawyer and settled down just a few towns over from our parents. Once in a while, a text from her would appear on my phone, dripping with condescension. "Heard you're still playing soldier. Hope you're enjoying your little adventure," she wrote once, followed by a winking emoji. I never replied. There was no point in wasting my breath on people who held both me and my wife in such contempt. Sophia was the complete antithesis of my family, a constant source of warmth and light. She poured her heart into her nursing job at the community hospital, showing a level of compassion for her patients that I found endlessly inspiring. We built a life together in a small apartment in Raleigh. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and it was filled with the kind of easy laughter and genuine affection I'd never known. Every night when I got home from the base, exhausted and covered in grime, Sophia would be there. A simple hot meal would be waiting on the table, and she'd greet me with that incredible smile. "How was the war today, Sergeant?" she'd joke, and the stress of the day would just evaporate. Still, I was always aware that the chasm between me and my family was more than just miles on a map. It was a fundamental break, a wound that would never fully heal. I had no idea then that the worst was yet to come, that I was heading toward a series of choices that would test the very limits of my soul. The first few years of our marriage were a blur of happiness. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. And it became infinitely more precious when we learned our little family was about to grow. I'd just gotten back from a grueling 3-week field exercise one spring morning. The second I walked in, Sophia flew into my arms. "Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling, "we're having a baby." I was speechless. I just held her, my heart pounding against my ribs, feeling a surge of joy so intense it almost knocked me off my feet. Maya was born on a dreary, rain-soaked day in October at a Raleigh hospital. The moment the nurse placed her in my arms, the world outside that room ceased to exist. I stared down at her tiny, perfect face, her wide, dark eyes and the shock of black hair so much like her mother's. A wave of love so powerful it was terrifying washed over me. "Maya," I breathed, giving her the name of Sophia's beloved grandmother. From the hospital bed, Sophia watched us, her face pale with exhaustion but shining with pure bliss. "She's our whole world, Liam." And she was. Maya became my new center of gravity. I spent countless nights in a rocking chair, Maya's tiny body warm against my chest, just listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing. In those quiet pre-dawn hours, I felt a profound shift inside me. I was becoming something more than a soldier. I was becoming a father. I made a silent vow to give this little girl everything I had been denied. A home filled with unquestioning love, a place where she would always know deep in her bones that she belonged. When Maya was born, a foolish part of me thought it might be the thing that finally thawed my family's frozen hearts. I sent them a formal announcement, complete with a picture of our beautiful baby girl, praying that the sight of their first grandchild would be enough. Their reaction was as frigid and predictable as a Scranton winter. My mother sent back a clipped formal note. "Congratulations, Liam. I trust you will raise her properly." There was no mention of Sophia, no hint of a desire to meet her granddaughter. Siobhan's response came via text. "A baby, huh? Let's hope she got your genes." I clutched my phone, my whole body vibrating with the urge to call and unleash a torrent of rage. But I didn't. I wouldn't expose Maya to a family where affection was a commodity, doled out based on social standing. Sophia saw Siobhan's text over my shoulder. She just offered a small, weary smile. "It's me they can't stand, Liam. I've made my peace with that. But I won't let them do the same thing to our daughter." We made the decision right then. Maya would not be going to Scranton. I refused to let her be raised in the icy shadow of the O'Connell home, where every action was judged and every emotion was suppressed. But in protecting our daughter, we were also severing the last frayed thread connecting me to my past. The silence from my family became absolute. Scranton faded into a collection of painful memories. And then, just as that old wound began to scar over, new fractures started to appear, this time much closer to home. Our marriage, the one thing that had been my anchor, began to subtly change. Sometime after Maya's 4th birthday, Sophia started to pull away. Her easy smile became a rare sight. I'd find her sitting on the sofa for hours, staring into the blue light of her phone, the silence between us growing heavier each day. When I'd ask what was wrong, she'd just brush it off. "I'm just exhausted, Liam, it's nothing." I fought to close the distance that was opening between us. I put in for leave and took her and Maya to the coast, thinking the sun and the salt air might bring back the woman I knew. But even on the beach, with the waves crashing at our feet, she would drift away, her gaze fixed on the horizon as if she were looking for an escape route. I kept telling myself it was a phase, that she was just burned out, that everything would eventually go back to normal. I was a fool. I was so busy trying to believe the lie that I missed the obvious clues. It was a Tuesday night, I think. Maya was in bed and I was cleaning up the kitchen when Sophia's phone, which she'd left on the counter, lit up. A text message from a number I didn't recognize flashed across the screen. "Same time tomorrow? 8 p.m. My blood went cold. A sick, heavy feeling started to crawl up from my stomach. I wanted to grab the phone, to unlock it, to know for sure. But I couldn't. I couldn't be that man, the kind of husband who snoops. But after that night, I couldn't stop seeing things. The late nights she blamed on extra shifts at the hospital, the way she'd stopped looking me in the eye, the stilted, obligatory nature of her hugs. The illusion shattered completely on a Thursday night in April. I'd been away in Texas for a week-long training exercise and came home a day early to surprise her. I had a bouquet of cheap gas station flowers in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other, planning to cook her favorite meal. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, and the sight that greeted me stopped my heart. Sophia was in our bedroom, an open suitcase on the bed, methodically folding her clothes into it. Maya was fast asleep in her own room, blissfully ignorant of the earthquake that was tearing our home apart. "Liam," Sophia gasped when she saw me, her voice shaking. I wasn't expecting you." "What's going on, Sophia?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even as my chest tightened into a knot of pure ice. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm so sorry, Liam," she whispered to the floor. There's someone else. The words were a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. The flowers slipped from my hand and scattered across the entryway. Someone else? I heard myself echo, the sound cracking in the middle. Sophia, what the hell are you talking about? She started to weep then, but they weren't tears of regret. They were the tears of a person who had already crossed a line and had no intention of coming back. I haven't been happy for a long time, Liam. I've tried, I really have. But I can't pretend anymore. You deserve more than this. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers, to understand how the woman I loved could do this to us, to our daughter. But all I could do was stand there paralyzed as she told me about a doctor at the hospital, a man she claimed saw her in a way I never could. I couldn't listen to anymore. I just needed her to be gone before Maya woke up, before our little girl had to witness her mother ripping our world to shreds. The divorce was a blur of sterile offices and legal jargon. Sophia asked for half of everything, and I didn't put up a fight. My only concern was getting full custody of Maya and putting the whole ugly ordeal behind me as quickly as possible. Every night after Maya was asleep, I would sit by her bed and just watch her breathe, my mind replaying the last year over and over, trying to pinpoint where I had failed. I had given Sophia everything I was capable of giving. It hadn't been enough. Now Maya was all I had left, the single point of light in the wreckage of my life. I never heard a word from Scranton. I didn't tell them what had happened, and they never bothered to ask. Perhaps they caught wind of it somehow, but in their eyes I was probably just another disappointment, another stain on the family name that was best ignored. It didn't matter. I didn't need them. I had Maya, and I swore to God she would never know the kind of conditional, transactional love I had grown up with. The months that followed Sophia's departure felt like living in the aftermath of a natural disaster. Our little apartment in Raleigh, once so full of life, was now just me and Maya, navigating the wreckage. Her bright, innocent laughter was the only thing that cut through the oppressive silence. I fumbled my way through the basics of single fatherhood. I learned how to wrestle her wild, curly hair into a ponytail, my clumsy soldier's fingers always losing the battle. I mastered a small repertoire of simple meals, macaroni and cheese, scrambled eggs, peanut butter sandwiches. And I learned how to deflect the questions that tore my own heart to pieces. Daddy, when is Mommy coming home? Every time she asked, it felt like a vice was tightening around my chest. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the brutal truth, that her mother had decided she preferred a life that didn't include us. So I would pull her into my arms, kiss the top of her head, and lie. Mommy loves you more than anything, sweet girl. She's just really, really busy with her new job far away. But I'm right here, and I'm never going anywhere. Maya would nod, her big trusting eyes searching my face, and I could see her tucking her own sadness away, a burden far too heavy for a 5-year-old to carry. Life at Fort Liberty became more intense. A promotion brought more pay, but it also brought more responsibility. Longer deployments, more frequent training exercises, and the constant grinding pressure of being on call 24/7. I did my best to juggle my duties as a non-commissioned officer with my duties as a father. I found a part-time sitter, a kind, older woman named Mrs. Gable who lived down the street. She watched Maya while I was on duty, but the guilt was a constant, gnawing presence. Every morning, leaving for work and seeing Maya's small face pressed against the window, her little hand waving goodbye, felt like a fresh betrayal. The deployment orders came out of nowhere, a gut punch I never saw coming. It was a sweltering afternoon in June. I was in my office at Fort Liberty, buried in paperwork, when my company commander called me in. He slid a manila envelope across his desk. "O'Connell," he said, his voice all business, "you're shipping out. 9-month rotation, Poland. Wheels up in 2 weeks." I just stood there, the envelope feeling impossibly heavy in my hand, the world tilting sideways. Poland, sir? I heard myself say, my voice sounding distant and strange. But I have my daughter. I'm all she has. I can't just leave her for 9 months. My commander's expression didn't soften. This is the army, Sergeant. You knew what you signed up for. Get your affairs in order. That night, my mind was a chaotic storm of panic and despair. I walked into the apartment to find Maya on the living room floor, happily scribbling in her coloring book. She held up her masterpiece, a picture of a lopsided house with 2 stick figures and a smiling sun. Look, Daddy, it's you and me. I dropped to my knees and pulled her into a hug, the plastic of the crayon box digging into my chest. I couldn't return her smile. 9 months. How in God's name was I supposed to leave her for 9 months after everything she had already lost? The first person I called was Mrs. Gable, praying she would be my salvation. But when I explained the situation, her voice was full of gentle regret. Oh, Liam, I adore that little girl, you know I do. But I'm 72 years old. I just don't have the stamina to be a full-time guardian for a child her age for that long. I called a few guys from my unit, but asking someone to take on your child for the better part of a year is an impossible favor. The thought of a full-time live-in nanny was a fantasy. My sergeant's pay wouldn't even cover half the cost. And then, like a specter rising from a grave, the name of my hometown surfaced in my mind. Scranton. My parents. They were the only relatives I had left, even if the word family felt like a lie in my mouth. I sat on my sofa late into the night, staring at Maya's crayon drawing, a nauseous knot tightening in my stomach. Send my daughter to Scranton. To that cold, silent house where I had spent 18 years feeling like an intruder. The thought was a violation, a betrayal of the promise I had made to her. But I was trapped. I had nowhere else to turn. I finally worked up the nerve to call one night after Maya was in bed. The phone rang, and just as I was about to hang up, my mother answered. Her voice was just as I remembered it, brittle and cold. Liam, do you know what time it is? I took a steadying breath. Mom, I'm being deployed. 9 months. Poland, I don't have anyone to watch Maya. I need to ask if she can stay with you and Dad. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then her voice, sharp as broken glass. You want us to take her? After the way you've treated this family, what do you think we are, Liam, a babysitting service? Rage, hot and blinding, surged through me. I squeezed the phone until my knuckles ached. Mom, please, I'm out of options. She's your granddaughter. I am begging you to help me just this once. Another long pause, then a heavy put-upon sigh. Fine, we'll do it. But don't you dare mistake this for forgiveness. This is about obligation. Get her here before you ship out. I ended the call and dropped the phone, the single word echoing in my head. Obligation. It felt like I had just signed my daughter's soul over to the devil. That was their word for it. Not love, not family, but a chore they were being forced to perform. But my back was against a wall. I couldn't take Maya to Poland, and refusing orders meant the end of my career. The only thing I had left to provide for her. It was an impossible choice. The next 2 weeks were a frantic rush of preparation. I sat Maya down on her little bed and tried to explain the unexplainable. Daddy has to go on a long work trip, Sweet Pea. You're going to have a little adventure and stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while. But I'm going to call you all the time, I promise. She looked up at me, her lower lip trembling. Will they be nice to me, Daddy? Her question was a dagger in my heart. I pulled her into a hug so tight it must have hurt. Of course they will, baby girl. They're going to love you because you are the most amazing kid in the whole world. It was a lie, and we both knew it. I knew my parents. I knew their coldness, their inability to offer the simple comfort a child needs. All I could do was pray that Maya was resilient enough to survive them, and I swore to myself that I would move heaven and earth to get back to her. The drive to Scranton felt like a funeral procession. It was a miserable, rainy day, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up. Maya sat quietly in her car seat, clutching her worn-out teddy bear. For the first few hours, she hummed to herself, but as the familiar landscape of northeastern Pennsylvania began to slide past the windows, she fell silent. I caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her expression was a mixture of fear and resignation that no 6-year-old should ever have to wear. "Daddy," she asked in a small voice, "can I bring my drawing? The one of our house?" "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my own voice thick. "You can bring whatever you want." When I pulled up in front of the gray house on Chestnut Street, it was like stepping back in time. Nothing had changed. It was still perfectly neat, perfectly joyless. My mother opened the door before I even knocked. Her eyes swept over Maya, a quick, critical inventory before landing on me. "Get her inside, Liam. Her room is ready." My father was in his usual spot in the living room armchair. He didn't get up. He just fixed me with that same piercing, judgmental stare I knew so well. 9 months. You're just dumping her here and taking off. What are we supposed to do if there's a problem? "I'll be back the second I can," I said, fighting to keep my voice even. "I appreciate you doing this." Maya's hand was a vice around mine. I knelt down to her level, pulling her into a fierce hug. "I love you so much, Maya," I whispered into her hair. "I'm going to call you every single night, and I will be back before you know it, okay?" She nodded, but silent tears were already carving paths down her cheeks. My own heart felt like it was splintering into a million pieces. I had to force myself to let go, to stand up, to walk away. The image of her standing in that doorway, a tiny, solitary figure next to my stone-faced mother, is burned into my memory. I turned my back so she wouldn't see the tears blurring my own vision. I got in the car, started the engine, and drove away into the rain, repeating a desperate mantra under my breath. Just 9 months. You can get through this. My time in Poland was a monotonous cycle of work and exhaustion. I was part of a team tasked with training and logistics support for the Polish armed forces, but my thoughts were always an ocean away, in that cold gray house with my little girl. I kept my promise. No matter how late it was, no matter how bone-tired I felt, I video called her every night. That tiny screen was my lifeline. For the first month or so, she was still my Maya, showing me her latest drawings and telling me about the squirrels in the backyard. But slowly, a change began to creep in. Her voice got softer, her smiles more fleeting. The light in her eyes started to dim. "Grandma and Grandpa don't like to play," she told me one night, her voice barely a whisper. "They just tell me to be quiet and not make a mess." I squeezed the phone, forcing a brightness into my voice that I didn't feel. "That's just because they're old and boring, sweet pea. It won't be for much longer. I'll be home before you know it." But her stories became more and more unsettling. She told me she had to eat her meals by herself at the small kitchen counter because, as her grandfather had apparently informed her, she was a messy eater. My heart ached with a helpless rage. Another night, she told me that Siobhan and her son, Kevin, had been over. Maya had accidentally knocked over a glass of water. "Aunt Siobhan said I was a stupid, clumsy girl, Daddy," she whispered, as if confessing a terrible crime. I wanted to smash my fist through a wall. I wanted to get on a plane that very second and rescue her from that prison. But I was trapped, a world away, shackled by my uniform and my orders. All I could do was offer hollow words of comfort through a phone, marking off the days on a calendar like a man on death row. Every call was a fresh form of torture, but I couldn't stop. It was the only way I had to check on her, to make sure she was still holding on. The breaking point came late one evening. My phone rang and Maya was on the other end, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "Daddy, I want to come home," she cried. "Please, I hate it here." Through her tears, she told me what had happened. Kevin had pushed her down in the yard, and when she started crying, Siobhan had screamed at her for being a baby. "Grandma just said I need to learn to behave myself, but I don't know what I did wrong." A white-hot fury unlike anything I had ever known consumed me. Siobhan, the golden child, the sister who had always looked down on me, was now venting her poison on my innocent daughter. And my parents, her supposed guardians, were not only allowing it to happen, they were complicit. I wanted to reach through the phone and throttle them all. "You are a perfect, wonderful girl, Maya," was all I could manage to get out. "You don't listen to a word they say. Daddy loves you and I am coming to get you." After that call, I sat down and wrote a letter to my mother, a desperate plea, struggling to keep the rage out of my words. "Mom, I am begging you to be kind to her. She is just a little girl who has been through too much. She doesn't need discipline, she needs love." She didn't write back. Instead, she called me a few days later, her voice dripping with venom. "Liam, we are doing what we can, but she is a difficult child. She is not well behaved like Kevin. She needs to learn some manners." I hung up the phone, the world turning gray around me. It was in that moment that I made a vow. The second I set foot back on American soil, I was getting my daughter out of that house, and I didn't care what I had to do to make it happen. Those 9 months in Poland were the longest 9 years of my life. Every day was a war on 2 fronts. The demands of my job and the constant agonizing ache of missing Maya. I kept a calendar by my bunk, slashing a red X through each day, a prisoner counting down his sentence. I wrote to her constantly, filling pages with stupid made-up stories about magical squirrels and brave sergeants who could fly, anything to try and coax a smile out of her. She sent back her own letters, filled with her shaky first-grade drawings of our little family. But her written words, once so full of childish joy, became more and more subdued. "I miss you, Daddy," she wrote in one, the simple sentence a spear through my heart. Finally, after an eternity, my tour was over. I flew back to the States. The sky over Raleigh was a brilliant, cloudless blue when I landed, but my own heart was shrouded in a storm of anxiety and dread. I had done my job. I'd received a commendation for my service in Poland. But the praise from my commanding officer felt hollow, meaningless. All I cared about was getting to my daughter, wrapping my arms around her and erasing the last 9 months as if they were a bad dream. The 6-hour drive from Raleigh to Scranton was a blur. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of hope and fear. I pictured Maya running to me, imagined her infectious giggle filling the air. I'd stopped on the way to buy her a giant fluffy unicorn, the kind with big sparkly eyes, praying it would bring back the light in her own. But a darker thought kept intruding, a cold dread that 9 months in that house had done permanent damage, that the bright, happy little girl I had left behind was gone forever. It was nearly dark when I pulled onto Chestnut Street. The gray house looked exactly the same, a cold, silent monument to my miserable childhood. I took a deep breath, grabbed the unicorn, and walked to the door, my hand shaking as I knocked. My mother answered, her expression as blank and unwelcoming as ever. "Liam," she said, her voice flat. "You're here. Get inside." I stepped into the entryway, my eyes scanning the familiar sterile room, searching for Maya. I found her in the living room, curled up in a corner of the sofa, clutching the tattered old bear she'd had since she was a baby. She was just staring at the floor. "Maya," I said, my voice coming out too loud, too desperate. Her head snapped up. For a split second, I saw a flicker of the old joy in her eyes. She scrambled off the sofa and ran to me. I dropped to my knees and caught her, holding on to her small, trembling body as if she might disappear. "I missed you so much, baby girl," I choked out, burying my face in her hair. But even as I held her, I knew something was terribly wrong. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't even smiling. She felt fragile in my arms, thinner than I remembered. Her skin was pale, and her eyes, those beautiful, expressive eyes that used to sparkle with mischief, were dull and guarded. She had learned to build a fortress around herself. "I'm here now, Maya," I murmured, stroking her hair. "We're leaving. We're going home." She just nodded, her face buried in my shoulder. I looked up and took in the scene. My father was in his chair, the newspaper held up like a shield, refusing to acknowledge my existence. Siobhan was leaning against the kitchen door frame, her son Kevin clinging to her leg. Her expression was a mask of pure contempt. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she said, her voice laced with her signature brand of poison. "Welcome home, hero." It turned out I had walked into the middle of some small weekend get-together. My parents, in a move of performative decency, insisted that Maya and I stay for dinner. Not wanting to cause a scene, I reluctantly agreed. At the table, Maya was placed at the far end, next to Kevin, a hyperactive 5-year-old with his mother's blonde hair and mean streak. I sat opposite her, trying to catch her eye, trying to get her to talk to me, but she just picked at her food. Her gaze locked on her plate. My mother floated around the table, the perfect hostess, laughing and chatting with her guests as if this were just any other happy family meal. The explosion came without warning. Kevin, who had been rocking back and forth in his chair, knocked his water glass, sending a cascade of ice water all over his own shirt. He let out a theatrical shriek. Before anyone could even process what had happened, Siobhan was on her feet, her finger pointed directly at my daughter. "Look what you did! You ruined his new shirt!" Maya flinched as if she'd been struck, her eyes wide with terror. "I didn't touch it," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I promise." But Siobhan was a runaway train. She marched over to Maya, her face twisted in a snarl, and before I could even get out of my chair, she raised her hand and brought it down hard across my daughter's face. The sound of the slap, that sharp, sickening crack, hung in the air, instantly silencing the room. Maya let out a strangled cry, her small hand flying to her bright red cheek, and then the sobs came, ragged and desperate. Something inside me snapped. I was on my feet, a raw, primal roar tearing from my throat as I shoved myself between Siobhan and my daughter. "Don't you ever!" I seethed, my entire body shaking with a rage so intense the world went red at the edges. "Touch my daughter again." Siobhan just glared back, her own eyes blazing with an unholy fire. "She needs to be taught a lesson, Liam. The world doesn't revolve around her." My eyes shot to my parents, a last desperate appeal for some shred of humanity. My mother stared at a spot on the wall, refusing to meet my gaze. And my father, from the depths of his armchair, delivered the final killing blow. "Siobhan's right," he said, his voice like ice. "The child is out of control." That was it. That was the moment my heart, already fractured, broke into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Maya, still sobbing, tugged on my shirt. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice broken. "Can we please go home now?" Her words were the only thing that mattered. Without another word, I bent down, lifted her into my arms, and walked out of that house for the last time. Her cries echoed in the cold night air as a light rain began to fall. I strapped her into her car seat, pulled her into a hug, and whispered into her hair, "You are my whole world, Maya. I am so sorry. I will never let anyone hurt you again." As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Maya was quiet in the back, her arms wrapped around the unicorn, her face streaked with tears. The fury was still there, a white-hot inferno in my chest, but beneath it was a new, chilling certainty. They weren't just flawed or cold or distant. They were monsters, and they had made their choice. When we finally got back to Raleigh, I carried a sleeping Maya into our little apartment and gently tucked her into bed, placing the unicorn beside her. "I love you, sweet girl," I whispered, kissing her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open for a second. "Daddy," she mumbled, her small hand finding mine in the dark, "we don't have to go back there ever again, do we?" "Never again," I promised, my voice thick with a conviction that felt like iron in my soul. "I swear to you. From now on, it's just us." After she was sound asleep, I sat down at the kitchen table with a pen and a single sheet of paper. I didn't write in anger. I wrote with the cold, precise clarity of a surgeon making a final, necessary incision. Mom, Dad. Tonight I saw the truth. I saw how you and Siobhan treated my daughter. I had hoped that, even if you could never find it in your hearts to love me, you might find a place for her. I was a fool to believe that. This is the last you will ever hear from me. Maya and I are no longer your family. Do not call, do not write, do not try to find us. You have made it clear we are not wanted. Consider your wish granted. I put the letter in an envelope and dropped it in a mailbox the next morning, knowing I would never get a reply. It wasn't a farewell, it was a final severance. I was cutting the cord to Scranton, to the O'Connells, and to the lifetime of damage they had inflicted. A few weeks later, a new set of orders came down. A transfer, Fort Cavazos in Austin, Texas. It felt like a sign, a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. A chance to put thousands of miles between us and the ghosts of our past. I didn't think twice. I started packing that day, getting rid of everything that wasn't essential. All we needed were our clothes, some books, and Maya's box of crayons. Everything else, the worn-out sofa, the chipped coffee table, even the framed photos of Sophia and me from happier times, I sold or gave away. I was determined to start over with a clean slate, unburdened by the wreckage of what came before. Austin greeted us with a blast of heat and a sky so wide and blue it felt like another country. I found a small rental house in a quiet suburban neighborhood with a little patch of grass out back for Maya to play in. It was nothing special. The walls needed a new coat of paint and the floors groaned with every step. But it was a sanctuary. It was ours. I filled the empty walls with Maya's colorful drawings, put a few cheerful-looking plants in the windows, and bought a second-hand kitchen table where we could share our meals. It wasn't much, but it felt like we had been given a second chance at life. Maya was only 6, but she was perceptive. She understood that we had crossed some invisible line into a new chapter. She never mentioned Scranton or my parents again, but I knew the scars were still there, just beneath the surface. I would find her sometimes, sitting by herself, just staring into space, her old bear held tight in her arms. The guilt was a constant companion. I had sent her into that lion's den, and it was my fault she had been mauled. I realized that my love alone might not be enough to heal her. A fellow NCO at my new unit, a good man named Sergeant Diaz, gently suggested I look into therapy for her. "She's a tough kid, Liam," he told me one day, "but that's a lot for a little person to carry. Sometimes they need someone to talk to who isn't Dad." My first instinct was to resist. I didn't want Maya to feel like she was broken, like there was something wrong with her. But then I started noticing things. The way she'd jump at a loud noise, or how she would immediately clam up if I even used the word family in a casual conversation. I knew Diaz was right. I found a child psychologist named Dr. Evans, a kind, soft-spoken woman with a reassuring smile. Her office was a cheerful, sunlit room overflowing with books and toys. Maya started seeing her once a week. In the beginning, Dr. Evans told me she barely spoke. She would just sit and draw, her pictures a chaotic mess of dark, angry scribbles. But slowly, with patience and time, she began to trust. She began to talk. One afternoon, as I was waiting to pick Maya up, Dr. Evans came out to speak with me. "She's an incredibly resilient little girl, Mr. O'Connell," she said. "She knows you're her rock, but she's carrying a lot of misplaced guilt. She needs to learn that it is never, ever her fault when the adults in her life fail to love her properly." Her words landed like a physical blow. I had tried so hard to shield her, but I hadn't been able to protect her from the deepest wounds. After that, I made a conscious effort to change how I spent my time with her. It wasn't just about playing games or reading stories anymore. It was about listening, really listening. I would ask her about her drawings, about what she was thinking, about what made her happy. And little by little, I started to see a flicker of the old light returning to her eyes. It was a fragile flame, but it was there. Austin began to feel like home, one small, quiet moment at a time. We found a favorite park, a place with huge oak trees and a tire swing that Maya adored. I surprised her one weekend with a clumsy, flop-eared golden retriever puppy we named Buddy. And the sound of her uninhibited, joyous laughter as he chased her around the yard was the sweetest music I had ever heard. We even started a little garden in the backyard, planting a few hardy succulents and a tiny lemon tree that Maya was convinced would grow lemons as big as her head. One Saturday, we were out back, covered in mud, trying to get a tomato plant to stay upright. Maya suddenly stopped what she was doing and threw her arms around my neck. "Daddy," she said, her voice muffled against my t-shirt, "I'm glad we live here. It's better than Grandma's house." I dropped to my knees and held her, my own eyes stinging with tears. "Me too, sweet girl," I whispered. "Me too." Every night we had a ritual. I'd read her a chapter from whatever adventure book we were working our way through. And sometimes I'd tell her my own stories, highly sanitized, cartoonish versions of my army life, where I was a bumbling superhero who was always getting into silly situations. She would laugh until she couldn't breathe, her little body shaking with glee, and in those moments I knew that our broken little family was going to be okay. It wasn't a simple life. There were days I'd get home from the base, my body aching and my mind numb with exhaustion, and all I would want to do was fall onto the sofa and disappear. But then Maya would be there, tugging on my hand, insisting we go outside and throw a ball for Buddy, and I would find a reserve of energy I didn't know I had. I was learning how to be two people at once, the disciplined soldier and the patient, gentle father. I was determined not to become a carbon copy of my own dad, a man who saw fatherhood as a series of commands and corrections. I wanted to be Maya's safe harbor, the one person in the world she knew she could count on, no matter what. I was slowly starting to grasp that being a father wasn't about grand gestures or providing a perfect life. It was about showing up. It was about being there fully and completely for the small, sacred moments. The afternoon she finally managed to ride her bike all the way down the sidewalk without my help. I was running right behind her, whooping and hollering like a madman. The day she brought home a school art project with a gold star on it, I treated it like a masterpiece and gave it the place of honor on our refrigerator. Those were the things that mattered. Those were the bricks we were using to build our new life. A home built on a foundation of unconditional love. I severed all ties to Scranton. I changed my number. I never answered their letters. Once a voicemail from my mother somehow got through. "Liam, this is foolish. You cannot just erase your family. You need to think about what you are doing." I deleted the message without a second thought. I had wasted 30 years of my life chasing an approval they were never going to give. My only mission now was to be the father Maya deserved. I never tried to find out what happened to Sophia. I heard a rumor that she'd moved to the West Coast with the doctor, but it was just noise. She had made her choice. My job was to build a life for my daughter that was so full of love and stability that her mother's absence would become a footnote, not a gaping wound. And even though it was just the two of us, we weren't lonely. In Austin, we found our people. There was Sergeant Diaz and his wife Maria, who had us over for barbecues every other weekend and taught Maya how to make tortillas from scratch. There was Dr. Evans, who was so much more than a therapist, and even Mrs. Gable, our old sitter from Raleigh, would send cards and little care packages for Maya. These were the people who showed up for us. They weren't connected to us by blood, but they were our family. One clear night, Maya and I were lying on a blanket in the backyard, looking up at the stars. "Daddy," she said out of the blue, her voice small and serious, "are we going to be okay?" I smiled and pulled her into a hug. "We're going to be better than okay, sweet girl," I told her. "We have everything we need." It was about a year after we moved to Austin when I got the news. It came in a text message from an old high school acquaintance, a woman named Kate who still lived in Scranton. "Liam," it read, "I don't know if you've heard, but I thought you should know. Siobhan is in a lot of trouble." I just sat there on my sofa staring at the phone, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. I wanted nothing from Scranton, nothing from them. But a small, dark corner of my mind was curious. What could possibly have happened to my perfect sister, the one who had treated my daughter with such casual cruelty? Kate's follow-up texts laid it all out. Siobhan's picture-perfect marriage had imploded. Her husband, the successful attorney, had finally had enough of her explosive temper and paranoid jealousy. He had filed for divorce and, using his legal expertise, had managed to cut her off financially, leaving her and Kevin with next to nothing. She'd been forced to crawl back home, to move back into that suffocating gray house with our parents. But that wasn't the worst of it. A few weeks after moving back, Siobhan had gotten into a screaming match with a neighbor after their son accidentally knocked Kevin over at the playground. It had escalated and Siobhan had ended up physically assaulting the other child. Now the family was threatening a lawsuit and the whole town was talking. I read the texts and a clear image formed in my mind. Siobhan, once the queen of Scranton, now trapped in the same house that had nearly smothered me. Her perfect life in ruins, the subject of the very gossip she had always feared. For a fleeting moment, I felt a grim, satisfying sense of justice. She was finally getting what she deserved. But the feeling didn't last. It was quickly replaced by a hollow ache. I didn't want to be the kind of person who took pleasure in someone else's misery, not even hers. I didn't want to carry their poison inside me. About a week later, my mother called. I saw the Scranton area code and almost declined it, but something made me answer. Her voice was different this time. The usual icy condescension was gone, replaced by a raw, unfamiliar desperation. "Liam," she said, "we need your help." "Siobhan, she's in a terrible mess. We don't know what to do." I held the phone so tight my knuckles turned white, a familiar, bitter resentment rising in my throat. "Help?" I said, the word dripping with disbelief. "You're calling me for help? Is this some kind of sick joke?" I could hear her take a shaky breath. "Liam, please. She's your sister, your family. You can't just abandon her." "Family?" I nearly shouted into the phone. "You want to talk about family now?" Siobhan put her hands on my daughter. She hit a 6-year-old girl, and you and Dad stood there and told me she had it coming. And now you have the audacity to ask me for help. There was a long pause. When my mother spoke again, her voice was small, defeated. "We made a mistake, Liam. We know that now. Please, think of Kevin. He's just a little boy. He's your nephew." I ended the call. I didn't let her finish. Kevin may have been my nephew, but Maya was my daughter, and not once, not for a single second, had any of them treated her with a shred of decency. I saw Maya's terrified face in my mind, heard her small, heartbroken voice asking me why her own grandparents didn't love her. No, I owed them nothing. I walked over to the back window and looked out into the yard. Maya was there with Buddy, her face alight with pure, uncomplicated joy as she threw a tennis ball for him. That sound, her laughter, was all the confirmation I needed. I had made the right decision. We didn't need Scranton. We didn't need the O'Connells. We had each other, and we had this new life, a life we were building for ourselves, free from the shadows of the past. I never took another call from them. I blocked their numbers. I threw their letters away unopened. I didn't want to know what became of them. I had finally escaped their orbit, and I was never, ever going back. Siobhan had made her bed. My parents had chosen to lie down in it with her. The consequences were theirs to bear, not mine. I went back to my life. I focused on my work at Fort Cavazos and, more importantly, on Maya. The change in her was remarkable. She was blossoming, making friends at her new school, her drawings once again exploding with bright, happy colors. I knew the wounds from Scranton were still there, deep down, but I also knew that with enough love and patience they would fade. My victory wasn't about revenge. It was about building a good life, a happy life, in spite of them. Every single day I tried to be the kind of father I had always needed and never had. That was my triumph. This isn't a story with a happy ending, not in the traditional sense. I lost the people who were supposed to be my family. I lost the woman I thought was the love of my life. For a while there, I thought I had lost myself. But what I've learned is that family isn't about shared DNA. It's about the people who show up, the people who love you without conditions. Maya taught me that. She's the reason I get up in the morning, a constant reminder that real love isn't about keeping up appearances or demanding perfection. It's just about being there. I've also come to understand what forgiveness really means. It's not about pretending the hurt never happened. It's about making a conscious choice not to let the past have power over you. I will never forgive my parents or my sister for what they did to my daughter, but I refuse to let my life be defined by bitterness. My energy is better spent creating a world for Maya where she is safe, where she is cherished, and where she will always know her own worth. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it's this. Hold on tight to the people who love you for who you are, and don't ever be afraid to walk away from the ones who don't, even if they share your name. Your life is your own. Don't waste a second of it trying to live up to someone else's script. Find your own way. And if you're lucky enough to have someone to protect, someone like my Maya, then pour every ounce of your being into making them feel safe, cherished, and whole. In the end, that's the only battle that truly matters.